You're in the rant wormhole where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons want me to rant about. You can get one if you become one. Today's rant is at the request of Not Gran, who says to rant about the push in AAA games for hyper-realism. I could have sworn I ranted about this in the last rant hole. Maybe I was just ranting about the modern games industry in general. But the push for hyper-realism is really baffling to me. I have to wonder where, like, how they don't recognize the diminishing returns on this, and like where they're getting the impression that this is what people are focused on, because like the average consumer, I don't think, can tell the difference between like pretty good and really amazing like detail in photorealism in graphics, you know? Like, not to say that I don't think they can tell when things have taken like a major step up, like when we went up to from PS2 to PS3, like there's a significant difference. But I don't think the average person is going to think that, like, you know, Uncharted 4 is dramatically more impressive than Uncharted 2 was, you know, just because like it's higher fidelity and like even better fucking, you know, textures and everything. It's just like you can tell when you look at them side by side, and you know that you would prefer to have the latest and greatest. So like obviously if both of them exist, then you're gonna favor the one that's even better looking. But like there was no need to keep raising the bar higher and higher. And when we do it, it makes it harder and harder for other games to succeed, because they're seen as like dated, and like they can't get the same review scores because of shit like that, because reviewers will hold games up to the standards of, you know, of like what is considered cutting edge in their time. And so as long as a game can come out that gets a 10 out of 10 because it is like mechanically perfect and has like up to date modern graphics, then like that will, you know, it'll make people say like, oh well, you know, you can do both, so every game should be like this, you know, which creates a dangerous precedent, because then they're docking points off of great games for not having photorealistic graphics, and meanwhile games are getting a pass for having photorealistic graphics that don't deserve it, you know? So like I think that it's a weird thing to put so much priority on. And now granted, I do think that for a lot of people, like just seeing something that looks impressive to them is going to draw them in. You know, like the first time I ever saw Final Fantasy X on the PS2, like why I wanted to play it is because it was the best looking game I had ever seen. You know, like I just couldn't believe that graphics could look that good at the time. So like photorealism is a great way to benchmark how far we've come, you know, graphically, because you can look at just say, does it feel more real than before, you know? But is it necessarily a measure of things looking better? I would not say so. Like, do I think that, say, The Last of Us looks better than Super Monkey Ball? No. Like, I think that color and aesthetic and design is all so much more important than fidelity, that like I'm glad we have the ability to go as hi-fi as we want, but just like why? It's not going to be like a major advantage over what stylization would be, you know, other than in that it will impress a broader number of people because it's just easier to see fancy graphics and say, oh, that looks fancy, that looks, I can't believe how real that looks. But like that's wearing off, because now again, like I said, like people only reach a certain level with that where they can even parse the difference, where like I think we're at a point now where even normal people are not that easily impressed with graphics. Like they expect it to be up to a certain level, but like, you know, it has to be pretty jank. It has to be like Mass Effect Andromeda before regular people pay attention to like it not being up to snuff, and that's because that game is like abysmal looking, you know, because it's like fundamentally broken graphically. So like you have to break it for people to really give that much of a fuck. But like if you ask me, When I go back and play games from the sixth generation consoles, I really feel like that was the high point in like creating interesting video games, because like it was like all the tools were at your disposal to make something of like to make something mechanically fresh. And like so we reached a point where, like, you know, we had done all you could do with like 16 bits, and granted, like, you know, step up consoles could do better 2D, and like, you know, the PC can do better 2D than like what those early consoles could do. But nonetheless, when you added in the ability to do 3D, suddenly that is the fascination. And like, you couldn't do anything that precise on the N64 or the PS1. So when you got to PS2 and GameCube, it was like that addition of just like having 3D work smooth, you know, and Xbox as well, like just being able to smoothly do 3D games is basically the pinnacle. Like when you get to that point, it's like there's not much farther you can go in like stepping up the technology in ways that will improve gameplay. You know, at least not for the type of games that are popular or that are going to be more than like a niche that is made for the sake of, you know, having some new peripheral or some new way to explore how gaming functions. But like for the most part, when we got to that generation, innovation had come as far as it basically could. Like having more disk space was important eventually, you know, stuff like that. But like the biggest problem with the GameCube is that they had those mini discs, and like the GameCube could output really phenomenal graphics. And like most of the games had really amazing art design, and usually they had some kind of unique gimmick. You know, they were all like trying to push new ways to explore 3D space with more technicality than before. But like, you know, you couldn't fit a long ass RPG onto those fucking game discs, and like, eventually, you know, I think upgrading to the PS3, that whole generation, like, things got weird because Nintendo made the Wii, and that didn't even try to step up. And then the PS3 and Xbox 360 got into this like arms race to see who could make the most photorealistic, comfortable to play, like, genre game possible. It became that like everything is either an open world game or an over the shoulder shooter or a first person shooter, you know, that use the same control schemes, because those are comfortable and those kinds of games are fun and they lend well to this style. And like, you know, it's like a perfect storm of like, okay, here's how to make a successful video game. And it's really unfortunate that that became so clearly defined that everybody's chasing after it, and, you know, just trying to make the shiniest version of the same fucking thing you've played 1,000 times, as opposed to like, you know, saying, all right, fuck the visuals, we can do visuals cheap and it will still be a good game. We all know this. So how can we like radically push gameplay and like coming up with just new ideas, and then worry about the aesthetic afterwards? You know, like match the budget to like match the aesthetic to whatever budget we have on hand to handle a game with these mechanics. You know, like, what is the audience for this? How can we market to them with the aesthetic overlay? You know, if it's a story-driven game, what will match the story? You know, that's what I'd like to see anyways. That's it for that rant.